Hello Recruit, and welcome to Astroneer Academy 301, Introduction to Creative Mode. This is the first course in the third semester of Astroneer Academy. Up until now, you have learned practical knowledge about survival, creating power grids, setting up functional bases, traveling on land and space, and powering gateway chambers. You have even learned how to begin earning bragging rights as a recruit with 19 different achievements. It has been a lot of work, and I think we could all use just a little break. Throughout several courses this semester, we're going to take that break. And in today's course, we're going to set aside the adventure portion of being an Astroneer and channel our inner Bob Ross in creative mode. But before we get too deep into our discussion of creative mode, we need to take a look at the giant red letter warning staring us in the face. Any save that you start as or convert to creative mode will have achievements disabled. Even if you revert that save back to adventure, it will still not be useful for obtaining any achievements. Now, this is not a universal restriction across all of your saves. It only applies to your time and actions within a save that is currently or has been in creative mode. So if you haven't completed all the achievements and you turned on creative mode, don't panic. Just start up a new adventure or pick up an old one and you can continue unlocking achievements. So what is creative mode? To oversimplify it, creative mode allows you to create pretty much anything you want at any time with no concern of research bytes or resources. It also features flight without jetpacks, advanced options for your terrain tool, and much, much more. So let's dive in. Starting the new creative mode save begins much the same as starting any new adventure, though with a few extra options. Don't worry, you can change these settings later, so we're not going to discuss them right at this second. For now, you launch from the LREV and you land on Selva with your starting shelter and landing pad. You still have the initial startup package and nothing else. But open up the research catalog and things look a lot different. Immediately, you notice that there's a few new buttons, but there's also a few new things in the backpack section. The very top row has some new items, the terrain anchor, the leveling block, and several different plinths. And again, we'll discuss what those do in just a minute. So the research catalog also has 3 new tabs. Wait a minute, hold that thought. The research catalog has a fancy new name in creative mode. The delivery catalog. The 5th tab has all of your resources. You'll find natural resources along with soil and scrap up in the first row, refined resources in the second row, composite resources in the third row, gases in the fourth, and various hazard and mutant seeds in the remaining rows. The next tab to the right has a row with a few research samples that you can scan for bytes, and another row with some high byte value research objects that you can place in the research chamber. And the final tab, which resembles a magnifying glass, combines everything from the other 6 tabs in one place. Honestly, I find this final tab to be just a little bit overwhelming to scroll through, so I tend to stick to the other ones. This new and improved delivery catalog also allows you to instantly spawn any item that you wish. Simply select the item you want to spawn, click the big green button, and it magically appears right in front of you. Did you spawn the wrong item? Don't worry, just select it and delete it. We'll take a look at those controls in just a moment. You can also quickly spawn duplicates of any item that you're holding without having to spam that green button in the delivery catalog. Simply pick up and hold the item you wish to duplicate and then hit enter on your keyboard or right on the D-pad on a controller. You can keep right on spamming duplicates of that item until you have as many as you want or until your frame rate becomes a slideshow. So let's take a step back and look at those new items found in the first row of the first tab, starting with the various plinths. You will find 5 total plinths and they correspond to the first 5 tabs found in the delivery catalog. Select one and you'll see that it has an arrow button on either side and a hologram, resource, or item in the center. The buttons allow you to scroll between all of the available items. For example, if you choose the backpack printer plinth, you can scroll between all items that are available via the backpack printer and the backpack printer tab in the delivery catalog. Now, plinths might not make a lot of sense at first glance. I mean, you could already select any item from the delivery catalog and spawn it with ease, so why do we need a second way to do the same thing? Well, plinths can make the process a lot easier. Since they are tier 1 objects, you can attach them to your backpack or any other storage slot. Granted, when they're attached to a storage slot, the selection buttons disappear and the plinth temporarily becomes locked to whatever item was selected. This can be rather handy though, because it gives you a quick way to literally grab new objects and resources out of thin air. You want to build a ton of small batteries? Select the battery on the plinth, attach it to a storage, and then just grab as many batteries as your little space person heart desires. But the real magic of plinths comes into play if you're wanting to use creative mode as a way to get some things set up for an adventure game. Maybe you really do want to play an adventure, but you'd also like some of those perks of creative mode. Well, spawn in one of each plinth, then turn off creative mode in the settings. Those plinths will remain fully functional now that you're back in adventure mode. One of the other new items available in creative mode is the LOD anchor. As you've journeyed around an Astroneer, you have no doubt noticed that objects tend to render with a greater level of detail the closer you get to them. As you move away, those details begin to fade. But what if you've just spent hours making a monumental sculpture and you want to see it in full detail? That means you're probably going to need to step back quite a distance from it, which also means that portions of it might not even render in or have a high level of detail. This is where the LOD anchor comes into play. You can have up to 7 LOD anchors active at any given time. Simply place them in the areas you wish to retain high level of detail in, and those areas will remain at full fidelity the entire time they are in your line of sight. Now granted, only 7 LOD anchors can be active at any given time, so you're not going to be able to run around the planet and render the whole thing in full detail. Thankfully, the LOD anchors themselves keep track of how many are activated at any given time. If you turn on an 8th LOD anchor, the first one you turned on will turn itself off. The remaining new item here is the leveling block. The tooltip of the leveling block explains to you exactly what it does. It creates terrain that aligns to the voxel grid. But wait, you might be wondering what a voxel grid is. Well, think of it this way. The planet that you're on is created through a randomly generated seed, with a massive 3-dimensional grid defining where all the various terrain types and biomes will go. A voxel is a single point within that grid. Add up all of those single voxel points, and you have a voxel grid. So when you use the leveling block, it will create a perfectly square bit of terrain that lines up with that massive 3-dimensional voxel grid. At some places, that might produce a cube of soil at kind of some odd angles, but at other places, it'll produce a cube that is flat relative to the surrounding area. You can usually find these relatively flat areas near the North and South Pole gateways, as well as some of the gateways on the equator and some other areas on the planet. Everywhere else though, the cubes of soil are probably going to be created at a somewhat funky angle. The leveling block will retain its functionality if you switch back to adventure, but there is no way to create extra leveling blocks once you have made that switch. With those new items covered, let's go back to the settings menu for creative mode. Now this is going to go pretty quick because most of them are fairly self-explanatory. The first option allows you to toggle creative mode off and on, and that's what introduces that huge warning at the top right concerning achievement progress. Free oxygen can be toggled off and on, and when it's on, it means you don't have to worry about suffocating because you're not ever going to run out of oxygen. Free vehicle fuel allows you to utilize shuttles, jetpacks, and land vehicles without any thrusters, fuel, or power required. If you toggle on unlimited backpack power, your backpack battery will never drain. The invincible setting pretty much means you can't die, unless of course you choose to respawn at the starting shelter. But that does mean that damage from falls and hazards that we discussed in Astroneer Academy 102 is non-existent. Be warned though that if you turned off free oxygen, you can still suffocate, even with invincible turned on. If you enable invisible to hazards, all of those various hazard plants will simply ignore you. Remove decorators while painting allows you to leave rocks, trees, and other decorator objects in place while you're painting the terrain around them. Now note this only applies to painting the terrain, not removing it, adding it, or flattening it. If you turn on the option to disable resource collection, your terrain tool and other drills will cease to gather resources as you manipulate the soil. Those resources will still be removed, but you'll not gather them into nuggets on storage or on your backpack. Show terrain anchor status ties in with the LOD anchor that we looked at just a moment ago. If you turn this on, you will always see the LOD anchor's area of effect until you disable this setting again in the menu. Enable a cursor light allows you to choose whether or not to light up the area surrounding the reticule of your terrain tool. And then there's some options that kind of give you superpowers. Okay, well, not really superpowers, but it is going to seem like that. Flight speed allows you to adjust how quickly you fly in free flight mode, but it does not impact your flight speed while using jetpacks. You can dawdle about at a leisurely pace or zoom around at death-defying speeds and everything in between. And of course, to activate free flight mode, just double jump. The time of day setting definitely feels like superpowers because it allows you to control time itself. Move the time of day slider around to adjust, well, the time of day. Adjusting the sun orbit does pretty much what it says. It'll adjust the angle at which you see the stars, planets, and sun moving around in the sky. Again, superpowers. And finally, solar time multiplier is a fancy way to say that you have control over how quickly time passes with relation to the day-night cycle. The default setting is 1, and the day-night cycle will progress as usual. Set it to 0, and that day and night cycle stops entirely. Crank it up to 10, and the days and nights fly by in just mere seconds. And if you want a good laugh, go ahead and put that solar multiplier up to 10, then jump into a shuttle and head into space. I'm not going to show it to you here. It's something you really just need to experience for yourself. There's also a few settings that pertain to the AERO Drone. So let's talk about the AERO Drone real quick. It's an adorably cute little camera drone that you can control independently, giving you an entirely new perspective on your surroundings. And of course, AERO has its own set of controls. Thankfully, these are also displayed on screen when you launch AERO, so we won't need to cover them in too much detail. To launch AERO, either use the option in the settings menu, or simply open your backpack and click on the AERO drone itself. It immediately launches and you'll now be looking through the drone's perspective. At the top left, you can see the controls for recalling the drone, which will cause AERO to return to your backpack, along with an option to hold drone position. Holding position causes AERO to hover in place and switches back to your perspective, while also allowing you to once again control your own movements. You can easily resume controlling AERO by pressing the same key or button that you used to hold AERO's position originally. At the bottom left, you find the option to take a photo. This functions much like the small camera, taking a snapshot and allowing you to select from one of several filters. There is no option to save a local copy of your photo, however, so you'll still need to rely on something else if you wish to have a permanent copy of your photo. At the bottom, you see the options for toggling the control between yourself and AERO. By default, you will be controlling AERO when it launches, but if you need to move yourself around a bit, simply toggle the controls and, well, move about. Of course, you cannot interact with any options while AERO is active in this mode, but you can use your terrain tool and emotes. Toward the right of AERO's display, you see options for zooming in and out, ascending and descending, and increasing or decreasing AERO's flight speed. Again, these are all really self-explanatory, so we're not going to go over them in detail. But you can also control AERO's flight speed in the settings menu. And as we mentioned just a moment ago, you can launch or recall AERO from the settings menu as well, plus you can turn AERO's UI off and on with the Show Drone UI option. And there's just two final notes about this little drone. First, AERO's customization is linked directly to your own suit palette. While AERO does not include hats or masks, your suit palette will change the palette that AERO is sporting as well. Second, AERO is currently limited to creative mode only. Hopefully that's going to change in the near future so that we can have a cute little drone friend in adventure mode as well. And believe it or not, the changes from adventure to creative do not stop there. The terrain tool sports some fancy new tricks and even a new name. It's not just a terrain tool anymore, it's a creative tool. So fancy. It can still raise, remove, and flatten terrain, but it also has the ability to select a nearby soil color and a paint tool that lets you paint with your chosen color. And that's not all. With your terrain tool, with your creative tool selected, you can access a whole new menu that is full of useful options. The three sliders at the top are fairly straightforward. Deform speed lets you select how quickly the creative tool deforms terrain. Size changes the size of the reticule. And range allows you to drastically increase or decrease the maximum reach of your creative tool. And of course, you don't have to really worry about using a drill because you can simply check the ignore hardness box and the creative tool will dig through all terrain with ease. Below that, there's a color palette. This palette will change based upon which planet you're currently feeling your creative juices flowing. You're not able to utilize a color palette from one planet on a different one, unless of course you use this quick pro tip. While you can't actually access those palettes directly, if you really have your heart set on some lovely desert colors on Glacio, there is an easy workaround. You're already in creative mode, which means that you can freely spawn things to your heart's content. With that in mind, open up the delivery catalog and spawn yourself some terrain analyzers. Head to the planet that has the palette you want and fill up as many terrain analyzers with the different colors that you need. Now there is one caveat to this, however. You have to temporarily disable creative mode while collecting a new color. Why? Because terrain analyzers simply don't function in creative mode. But it only takes a couple of seconds to fill a terrain analyzer, so switch off creative mode for a moment, and as soon as your terrain analyzer is full, switch creative mode right back on. Now head back to where you want to paint. You'll once again need to switch out of creative mode, but first you'll probably want to spawn in yourself an inhibitor mod. That's because we're going to go back to the old school way of painting terrain with an inhibitor mod and a terrain analyzer. So while it doesn't give you the ability to select directly from another planet's palette, at least using this workaround does allow you to use palettes from planet to planet. So looking back at the palette, the colors to the left have 4 variations. The first is a light variant, with the second being slightly darker. The third will add a rock texture, and the fourth will make it super sparkly. The palette over to the right hand side doesn't have such options for each color, but you can tell which ones will have a rock appearance based on the diagonal lines running through the color. And by the way, you can also change the deform speed and brush size without accessing the menu. In fact, there are a ton of creative mode specific options, and you can check them all out in the Astropedia by heading to the creative section. The first page shows you some basic controls, while the second page goes over all of the creative mode options. Going back to the settings menu again, there is one final setting that determines how terrain add mode functions. With the server update, terrain will now add based upon the position and angle of the terrain tool reticule. If you toggle classic mode on, it'll go back to the way it used to function before the server's update, and it will add terrain toward your own perspective. If you haven't yet tried creative mode before now, you're probably realizing that it's a very powerful tool. With the freedom that creative mode grants, you're able to spend your time pursuing whatever your imagination can conjure up. Astroneers from all corners have built some very impressive structures and sculptures. In fact, in Astroneer Academy 402, we'll be spending some time talking with some people who have created some truly breathtaking things. The fine-tuning that's available with the creative tool allows you to precisely add and remove soil, opening up a huge level of detail that is difficult, if not outright impossible, to achieve in adventure mode. On top of that, creative mode is a great sandbox for testing proof of concept. I recently wanted to find a way to construct a massive solar array at the North Pole of Calidor that would hopefully provide around-the-clock solar power. Through a bit of trial and error in creative mode, I was able to find a way to make it work. I took that proof of concept into my adventure game, applying what I had learned, and constructed what I have dubbed the Solatron 5000. And my base on Calidor does in fact receive 100% of its power from just solar arrays. Creative mode's also just a great place to goof off. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you set off 50 solid fuel thrusters at once? In creative mode, you can find out. Or maybe you found a zebra marble and you want a huge collection of them. Just pick that zebra marble up and start duplicating it over and over again. Or maybe you just want to defy all common sense and construct a massive resource storage hole. Your FPS won't thank you, but you can definitely do it in creative mode. Or hey, why not turn on ignore hardness, set your creative tool to maximum range, and start drilling straight down to see how quick you can make it to the center of a planet. All of this, and pretty much anything else that you can imagine, is all possible using creative mode. But creative mode is not for everyone. And that's okay. Some people simply do not want to skip the survival aspects of being an astroneer in adventure mode, while others feel that their accomplishments don't really count unless they happened in adventure. Others feel that because you cannot get achievements in a save that was once in creative, they don't want to spend their time building a base in a solar system that began in creative. And one of Astroneer Academy's own contributors adamantly refuses to spend any time in creative mode and feels that the time that was spent developing creative mode would have been better used on other features and content. But whether you want to avoid creative mode or you're ready to embrace the mantra of it's your world, you can do whatever you want, you are now equipped with the knowledge of all things creative. In Astroneer Academy 302, we're going to look at joining other astroneers for some co-op time. But until then, I'm Brandon, reminding you to stay vainglorious.